Judas Priest and Metallica are among the most influential metal bands of all time, and yet it is not the only thing which unites the heavy metal founders and the most financially successful metal band ever. So without any further ado, let's take a look at why Judas Priest and Metallica are a lot closer to each other than it may seem at first, or than they are to a band like Iron Maiden. Here you go. Starting out around 12 years after formation of Judas Priest, Metallica took their first steps in the world of heavy metal when it was fully dominated by the former. By the late 70s, early 80s, Judas Priest became the quintessential heavy metal band, one of those bands which defined the genre, becoming a role model for anyone who are starting out their journey as a metal musician. And if you think that that statement is just a fruit of my wild imagination, well, it actually belongs to James Hetfield. And while thrash metal, for which Metallica became one of the originators, is vastly considered to be a mixture of speed metal, new wave of British heavy metal with some elements of punk rock, and Judas Priest of course played neither of those genres, I actually think that traditional style heavy metal performed by Black Sabbath and Judas Priest had much more effect on the Big Four style thrash metal than Iron Maiden and the company. And for Judas Priest, that influence actually formalized on their third album, Sin After Sin, and the release of Dissident Aggressor. In addition, such bands as Judas Priest and Black Sabbath, who started significantly earlier, by the early 80s, were already considered to be untouchables and not really a competition, for even though they hung out at the same heavy metal playground, they did that in a section for grown-ups.
Very respected frontman in this world, Mr. Rob Halford.
Of course, each of the big four bands either covered Judas Priest songs, dedicated songs to them, or in case of Dave Mustaine, who happened to play in both Megadeth and Metallica, showed his affection by writing some of the earlier songs as if they were taken straight out of a Judas Priest textbook. By the way, Dave Mustaine actually said that in the early days he became so entranced by Judas Priest, and especially by the twin guitar attack performed by KK Down in England and Tipton, that he tried to imitate the latter, yet his curly red hair didn't allow him to pull off the look.
You look like Glenn Tipton.
Fuck yeah!
Yet being one of the many influences is not of course the only thing which unites these bands. There are actually quite a lot of similarities between Judas Priest and Metallica, in addition of course to the frontman's hairstyle and goatee changes, and the fact that 20 years into his career, James Hetfield finally found a way to sound exactly like Rob Halford. One of the things which I personally love about Judas Priest is that despite having this trademark Judas Priest sound, none of the band's albums actually sound like its predecessor.
We all have varied interests musically outside of heavy metal, and that's when you listen to any of the Priest albums, they've each got their own particular identity that's drawn on from the fact that we don't just play everything in A for 58 bars with a 64-bar lead break.
Despite rocking the world for 50 years now, the band has never stopped evolving and challenging themselves, sometimes even to the point of not giving a crap about what anyone else would say. And this is exactly the formula which Metallica took, with some of their albums which could be considered as the band's misstep, yet which in reality simply broadened the band's fan base. In addition, I actually don't think that there is any other band which was able to do as much for bringing heavy metal into mainstream than Judas Priest or Metallica. With the release of Unleashed in the East, which by the way Lars Ulrich ranked as one of his favorite metal albums of all time, and its legendary follow-up British Steel, Judas Priest were able to steal the thunder from punk rock, and together with the new and catchy looks made the media, not only in Britain but actually all over the world, pay much more attention to heavy metal than ever before. Oh, and by the way, it is the opening track to British Steel, which Metallica of course loves playing live whenever Rob Halford's in town.
Shattering balls, crushing roll beating flights.
And I guess it's rather ironic that around the same time into their career as Judas Priest were upon the release of British Steel, Metallica dared to do what no other metal band did, Well, even though they weren't technically the first ones.
We've got a bone to pick with these two. You know, it's called Black Album. It's called Black Album. Now, where did the idea come from to do an all-black album, Metallica representative?
It's a underhanded left-wing tribute.
And released an album which did not only turn the metal world upside down and pushed the heavy metal agenda into the mainstream, but also made Metallica the most influential band throughout the 90s and possibly up until today. By the way, talking about the 90s, after Rob Halford left Judas Priest and formed Fight, in 1994 he got a phone call from somebody called Lars Ulrich, who invited the newly formed Fight and Rob Halford to join Metallica on stage for several nights. Rob actually recalls that Metallica were huge Judas Priest fans.
Hell bent for leather!
And one of the highlights of that mini tour, in addition of course to meeting Madonna for Rob, was to perform Rapid Fire together with the band.
Mr. Robert Halford. So Fight, and we're gonna do an old Priest tune, right?
Yet what is even cooler is that 25 years later, almost 70-year-old Rob would call himself a Metallica fan and would praise the thrash metal pioneers' live appearances.
Metallica, the extraordinary way that they interpreted their style of metal and branded it with such a unique force.
From then on, the relationship between the two bands reminded a Facebook friendship video, with Metallica and Judas Priest playing together on stage on several occasions, and of course praising each other's work on media whenever the opportunity comes.
Ride the lightning on the heavy metal Harley.
Funny enough though, in the 1980s, James Hetfield actually went out of his way to point out that he's not really influenced by anything metal related.
You go for any of that more mainstream metal, like Judas Priest or any of that stuff?
Nah. Too safe.
But to be fair, Metallica, just like Judas Priest 10 years earlier, did that about pretty much any band. Any except for Motorhead. I guess you couldn't talk trash about Lemmy even back then.
Who are your favorite artists or your main influences?
Motorhead.
Yeah, despite all that talk, the Judas Priest influence was of course very evident in the early Metallica work, and especially on the guitar front, for it was KK Down and Glenn Tipton who laid the foundation for anything the big four bands did in the early days.
Happy birthday to Glenn Tipton. He's inspired us, and we want to celebrate Judas Priest and him.
And yet, as weird as it may sound, the biggest similarity between Metallica and Judas Priest lies actually in their differences. In the fact that just like Judas Priest did in the early 70s, Metallica in the 80s took all their influences from the different musical genres and shaped it into something of their own, developing a genre which is destined to not be short-lived, but it will be striving through the years, inspiring thousands of bands around the globe to pick up their guitars and blast music of their own. And thus in 2021, when Kirk Hammett joins Judas Priest on stage to perform one of his favorite songs, he does so in a style which does not mimic his childhood heroes, adding something new and unique to the songs he grew up on.
I can't believe that you need my love so well.
And so for me personally, when it comes to defining heavy metal as we know it today in the 21st century, these two bands actually come up in the top 5 of the ones which shaped it, transformed it, even despite the resistance from the inside of the metalhead community, and kept it alive up until today.
Exactly.
And I personally am super excited to attend the Metallica 40th anniversary shows in San Francisco and provide full coverage of all the activities on the show next week.
Well, let's have a party.
And of course do exactly the same thing about Judas Priest's 50 Heavy Metal Years tour, and hope to have a lot of surprises for all the defenders of the faith.
Hello, Vlad. Hi, everybody. Hello, metal pilgrims.
But anyways, what do you guys personally think? I'm very curious to find out what die-hard Judas Priest fans think of Metallica and vice versa. Please let us know in the comments. As always, thank you so much for watching, guys, and keep rocking.
Watch out and hold on tight. We're heading your way like